nice and humid today. So good afternoon from sunny skies in North Carolina. Tori?
Yeah, and my name's Tori, and I'm from Lake Tahoe, Nevada, but also lived in the last 7 years in Kansas City, but now I'm in New York. So nice to meet you all. I'll give the story of my squirrel when I give an introduction when we get into the agenda, because it is a funny story and you all will likely see it the rest of the presentation as well.
There are people in the chat that are really interested in the story. I'm from Chicago. I'm born and raised in Chicagoland. I was born in Chicago. I now live in the suburbs. And it does get really cold here. Unlike Max, who's got the nice weather down there. And then, yeah. Tori, I didn't know you moved around a bit. So you were born in Lake Tahoe, you said?
Yes, I was the luckiest child to be able to grow up there. It was amazing. You could ski and sunbathe in the same day in July.
I've heard.
Yeah, it's one of the prettiest places. I have a twin sister who actually still lives there. She's a mechanical engineer and is building her own cabin. We're so different, even if we're twins. We look completely different too.
You have a twin.
I do.
There's another one just like you.
Not like me. Complimentary.
That is awesome. She's an engineer?
Yeah, she's a mechanical engineer and demos her own house. I keep asking her on Sundays, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I have a hammer. I'm rebuilding something." I'm like, "Oh, great. I'm at happy hour." That gives a great indication of us.
That's
I can
awesome.
see your hammer is kind of like, you taking a hammer to like, a database or, just writing some SQL and just some tables. Hey, so you all have hammers in different ways.
SQL is definitely your hammer.
Not until we started taking a vacation at the Lakehouse.
Oh.
Now things are just splendid.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, that was a slick transition, Tori. Oh, somebody said, Harry says one sister does software, the other sister does hardware. Yeah, that's awesome.
That's funny.
All right, well, I just have a few intro slides, so I'm going to run through those real quick and get to this. We can get to the good stuff. We're just for the panelists, I put the LinkedIn and the YouTube links in there so we can check out the chat spaces there. Okay. All right, so let's get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is another Data Collab Lab session. And this time we have hosts Franco and John. So this session is going to be about super powered Power BI with Databricks SQL. And we have our guests for today are Tori and Max from Databricks. So I wanted just to do a quick reminder that this is part of the Data Plus AI online meetup group. So if you're joining us from LinkedIn or YouTube, I'd love for you to check out the group and join us there. That's where we post all of our live events that we stream and everything's recorded too. So you can go to YouTube at a later date. If you'd like, we have a Data Collab Lab playlist. So I'll drop those links in the chat spaces for everyone. But we'd love for you to join that meetup group. That's where you'll get notified of the upcoming events and you can put them on your calendar. And then as always, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn so you stay up to date on all of our awesome announcements and all of our content that we're putting out. So I wanted to give a shout out to Denny and Brooke. They have a podcast series, so it's called Data Brew by Databricks, and they're in their second season already. So the second season is all about machine learning from research to production, and they have a lot of awesome guests. So I think they have 8 or 9 episodes for this season. So I invite you to check that out. I'll also drop the links in the chat on YouTube and LinkedIn, and they're available wherever you like to get your podcasts. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all those places. And then I wanted to share, we have a guest blog program. So if there's any writers out there, any aspiring writers, and you're interested in sharing what you're working on, I'd love to hear from you. I kind of helped put this program together, and I'd love to hear your ideas. So I invite you to check out that page on our website to learn more, or you're more than welcome to ping me on LinkedIn if you'd like. I'm happy to share some more ideas, maybe give you some ideas or suggestions of topics we'd like to hear about. But yeah, I invite you to reach out and share what you're working on. And so just a quick housekeeping. I know people like to ask questions in the chat spaces, so we're going to be monitoring that while we go through the presentations and answering some of the questions live. And this is recorded, and it'll be available on YouTube pretty much right after. It's the same link that we're live streaming through. So I'll drop that in the LinkedIn and the Zoom chat. So you're welcome to revisit the session at a later date if you'd like to check it out. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it to our hosts, Franco and John.
Thanks for having us, everybody. My name is John O'Dwyer. I mentioned before, I'm on the developer relations team here at Databricks. I'm also from Colorado. I've been living here for about 25 years. Thanks for joining us. Franco?
Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming along today. My name is Franco Patano. I'm a solutions architect here with Databricks. I am in the Chicagoland area, and my background is data warehousing and BI. So this episode right here is really close to my heart, and especially when I started seeing what our guests Tori and Max were working on. I was like, we have to do a Data Collab Lab episode on this. So without further ado, Tori, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Tori. I've been at Databricks for about a year and 4 months. And similar to Franco, I've had most of my career so far in analytics and data warehousing. I will say, personality-wise, my first boss that I had, was the director of strategic development, told me that I'm like a squirrel. Actually bought me a taxidermy squirrel that I still kept today. And the reason that he did was, you guys are going to find out. I'm very excited. I get very excited about pretty much any opportunity, and same thing with BI and any report. And I get these crazy look like, and then I talk really fast. But squirrels, just so you guys know, is about 20% of power outages. So they're really impulsive. And then they also lose about 20% of their nuts that they try to find. So even if I find opportunities, I get really distracted often. So he told me when he bought it for me, be less like a squirrel, but remain yourself. It stuck with me. So now you guys are going to see a squirrel the rest of the presentation, but it's really nice to meet you all. Max, pass it to you.
Wow. I don't think I can beat that introduction, but I will try to, just be myself. I think that's the only thing I can do from what you said, Tori. My name is Max Nienu, solutions architect here at Databricks. I've been here 2 years. Prior to Databricks, I was a data engineer. My career has been in data warehousing. I started out as a software engineer, but quickly I realized my love for data, and I've been in data since. And so I am really excited to talk to everyone here today, because if you know me, I am a self-proclaimed data nerd.
Awesome. Let's set it up. We've got a story, right, Tori? Who's going to take us through the beginning of the story?
I am. So Max, if you just share your screen, if you just want to go through our.
Out to share our slides.
Okay, so just to kind of start out with the agenda so we keep on track, as you guys know, I am a squirrel. I'm going to start out just with a summary of kind of our project. And I know I just gave you an introduction to who I actually am, but for this project and kind of our presentation, I'm going to be the lead analyst for our company, fantasydata.ai. I'm going to give that summary first of our problem, or our original statement of kind of what and who we are, and then how we delivered on our product analytic journey. And then we're going to get into an overview with Max on the Lakehouse and Databricks. A lot of you on the phone may have Databricks already, or might know what Databricks is, but we always just like to level set on the foundation and what Databricks is today, because we've evolved and we evolve fast. And then we're going to give a hands-on workshop with Databricks SQL, and we're going to get into it. And then after that, I'm going to end with our Power BI integration, because I've had a lot of experience in Power BI, and I'm going to really hone in on the 2 features Incremental Refresh, and what's about to be released in September, NQS or native query support, which is going to be really exciting for any of the Power BI users on the phone. Go on ahead, Max. And so this is a fictitious company. So if you Google search this, it's not going to come up with anything but likely fantasy sports. But fantasydata.ai for this purpose is a financial services company that's really focused on innovative banking experience in the fintech space. We really specialize in rewards programs. So for this specific use case, we're going to really focus on the transaction data and events within the application. And prior to using Databricks, really fantasydata.ai relied on unreliable tools, which is really similar to what I've used in my background, like MongoDB, which if they broke would cause the analyst process for creating new reports slowed down. And in addition, a real headache for engineering to make sure that the accuracy and availability of that data was made available. Databricks Lakehouse platform significantly improved our data quality, reliability, and performance of our pipelines. And furthermore, especially for analysts from a downstream current consumption, resulted in about 4 times faster with 2 times the amount of data. And I will say I'm giving a fictitious company name, but this is an experience that I had with a customer this last quarter. In addition to that, being able to enable and allow our analysts to easily query JSON structured data, resulting in lower TCO. And I'm going to show you that hands-on as we go forward. So what do the benefits we get with Databricks from this aspect, especially as you guys are about to see this hands-on and the interaction between me and Max from engineering to analysts when it comes to increased productivity? We always talk about the Lakehouse from a performance aspect and be able to deliver all of your workloads within that platform, but we've really matured the eyes for different personas to be able to productively do their work, but also collaborate. So what we found after this project is we reduced our effort to maintain and provision our infrastructure, which Max, the baddie that he is managing 20 streaming pipelines and 170 tables. And furthermore, increased reliability for all of our streams from Spark to Delta with 2 times data growth in last month, because our business is doing fantastic and people are using their cards now that COVID is over. And furthermore from that, we're improved our times. So there's just a little bit of metrics here to give you an understanding of the overall benefit of not only the productivity and TCO, but what I was able to deliver faster. Because if you think about product analytics, just from application development to engineering and analytics, it usually was a 6-month time frame to deliver on that project. And that was just even trying to get the data available to the end consumer analysts to then do their proof of concept. So I was able to deliver in weeks, risk management, customer cashback and credit rewards, and then our customer 360 journey directly to our CEO, CRO, and further executives.
Can I just kind of just draw something out here? I think the underlying point that you should really take away from this is that in today's world where JSON is becoming a really prevalent storage mechanism to transport data between organizations. So like REST APIs, websites, you generally get JSON back. So the prevalence of having to manage this JSON data is just growing over time. And it's not just limited to this one specific use case. A lot of different companies, a lot of different departments are now getting JSON data. And there's a lot of lift in taking JSON and actually making it queryable. And I think that's the big thing to pull out of here that Tori is drawing out, is that you can go from whatever JSON you're getting, right, applicable anywhere, and get the valuable insights much, much faster. So just want to draw that out there and kind of like connect the dots. Like this is not just applicable to like one different domain. JSON is becoming more prevalent to transfer data between different mechanisms, especially with REST APIs. So thanks for that. Do you have any comments? Like, are you seeing JSON data a lot more nowadays? And this is kind of like becoming a new way to do this?
We definitely are. And we're going to show you how Tori and I actually went through, and using Databricks SQL, Tori is actually able to query data on her own without me having to explode all the nested JSON fields for her. And now it's given her, like Databricks SQL has given her that autonomy to be able to take a lot of the tables that I build, and then like she would run her own product analytics on top of the data without me there. And that's helping her iterate a lot faster and do her job a lot better. So before we actually get into how, we went from doing everything we're doing and showing you all the new slick stuff. I just wanted to walk us through, back to time where we had data warehouses, and data warehouses were a thing of the past. And back in the day, data warehouses had a lot of data. You would ETL your data from your operational data stores into a data warehouse, and then you build some reports. And this actually took a long time. And a lot of these data warehouses just had a lot of problems, right? If you needed to expand your data warehouse footprint, you basically had to go buy a lot of other servers, and it took anywhere from 6 months to a year to be able to build a data warehouse and then build it to full functionality. It took a lot of manpower to actually do this. Now, with the problems of the data warehouse being that, they weren't able to do a lot of unstructured data like JSON, came, data lakes. And data lakes were very popular, and, they were very good for machine learning. And, they were also good for semi and unstructured data. But the more we use the data lakes, the more we figured out a lot of problems with data lakes, the complexity of actually operating a data lake, and just getting data out of the data lake was a problem, just because data was just dumped in there, causing what we call data swamps. And so if you've actually lived through a data warehouse and a data lake, you probably are, thinking back to all the things you had to do to get data out for your analyst or for your business. I just get PTSD thinking about all the things I had to do in my data warehouse and my data lake days. And that is why I'm really excited to talk about the Lakehouse, right? So the Lakehouse takes the good things from the data lakes and the good things from the data warehouse and then puts them together. And this is powered by the Delta engine that Databricks has built. And so we actually are able to serve unstructured, semi-structured, and structured data to machine learning, data science, and your BI use cases. And so this is what actually powers us to be able to do a lot of things that Tori is going to show, essentially being able to do your customer reports, your product analytics on a large scale. And so what we've seen is that, coexistence is not a desirable strategy, right? And so today, organizations want to be able to, keep a data warehouse and their data lake. But then doing the Lakehouse strategy is the better way to go. And now you're able to do a lot of the things you can do in your data warehouses, because Delta has the power of ACID transactions. And so you don't have to keep your traditional database management environments in order to be able to get ACID transactions. You get that straight out of the box with Delta. We have optimizations underneath the covers to help you with performance. And so you don't have to do things like create indexes, or have different strategies for reading data, for reporting, and doing machine learning on-prem. We have all those optimizations inside your Lakehouse. And so instead of coexisting between this old architecture and a data lake, we want you to actually adopt the Lakehouse strategy, because we've combined the goods from both of them, and we're giving you this new paradigm that allows you to actually be able to do everything you need to do on your data lake and on your data warehouses. But today, what our focus is going to be on is the BI use case, right? And so just from the ground up, we power, your semi-structured, your unstructured, and your structured data using Delta Lake. And then the focus here is not about Delta, but Delta Lake is what powers the Lakehouse. We're able to do your high query performance, and we give a single platform for you to be able to do your machine learning, your data science, and your streaming analytics. But today, what we're going to talk about is your BI use cases, because we think that BI is going to unlock the power of your business. So how do we get started? I know you're probably salivating. The way we like to think about this is, we have this thing called the medallion architecture, which is you having your raw data and filtering that raw data into what we call the silver layer, and then your gold layer. If you think about it in terms of a data warehouse, it is essentially your raw data, your staging, and then your reporting tables. Right. And so this curation layer allows you to take your data as it's coming in, filter it, clean it, put some like dates and filters on the data, and then aggregate it to a point where your business users are able to actually run queries on top of that data. We've seen a lot of customers use like the Kimball methodology to normalize gold tables, just because now with the power of cloud computing, it's easy to be able to query all these tables. And I'm going to show you Databricks SQL, or Tori's actually going to walk us through Databricks SQL. We're going to see how Databricks SQL is built with a native interface for our BI and SQL analysts, and it gives them an interface that they're used to, and so they can easily run queries and then do all the good stuff they do with all the SQL. Tori is a SQL person, and she's going to talk you through a lot of these things. I will let her show us her power and the magic she does every day to get our product analytics to C-level suite. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to walk you through how we go from getting raw data into getting data ready and prepped for our SQL analyst to be able to query. And since Tori is our lead data analyst, she's going to be the one to walk us through a lot of that.
So there was a question that came out. I just want to clarify. It's not just JSON only that this is supported for. Databricks SQL is the Delta Lake, which is Parquet with the transaction logger and the covers, is the primary way that we advise to use the best way to use Lakehouse. But what we're going through here with JSON is one common example that we go through. It's not that JSON is the only thing that's supported. There's actually a long list of things that are supported: CSV, text files, and anything that Spark could read. Just want to call that out. Sorry.
Thank you. So I'm going to just walk through a high-level example of how we think about data once we get the data from ingest to actually getting the data to our business, right? So here's an example of a wind turbine predictive maintenance model, right? And so what we do here is our wind turbines are going to be pushing data into our message queue here, and then Databricks is going to be ingesting the data into our bronze layer. And so this data is coming in as a JSON file. And what we're going to do is we're going to clean and we're going to parse these JSON files into aggregate tables in our gold layer. Now, sometimes we do have some fields that are nested JSON. And what we're going to show at the end of this is, how when I pass these tables to Tori, who's going to be using it for product analytics, how she can actually do the rest of her analytics by actually querying the JSON fields. And so we're going to really show you the power of Databricks SQL and using that to query tables that have not been pushed through a traditional database management system. And these tables are still going to be sitting on your storage layer, be it S3 or ADLS. And so first thing here, we're going to do our ingest here. So as you can see here, we're just doing the ingest. Here we're essentially just doing streaming here, and our data is coming in every 10 seconds. And once the data comes in and we sanitize and see what the data looks like, we can see here we have key value pairs. What we're going to do is we're going to essentially just parse this data into our silver table. And so our silver table here just does the parsing of the data into the individual columns here. We have our ID and our timestamp at the end. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do some join here. And then we're going to add some columns in here. So we're going to add the status column into this table here for our gold table. And we're going to filter the data, and then we're going to actually aggregate the data by IDs. And so once I have this final table, I know this is the table that Tori needs. And so what I'm going to do once I get this my final gold table is I'm going to hand it over to Franco, who's the admin on our system, to actually now give access to Tori, who is going to be the lead data analyst analyzing this data. So what we're going to do here is, instead of me running this SQL grant statement, we're going to show how we do that inside of Databricks SQL. Franco?
Thanks, Max. So I'm going to take this opportunity to show you all a brand new tool that is available in Databricks SQL now. You might have seen it, a new option pop up in your workspace. If you haven't, I'm about to show it to you. So in the left-hand side pane, there's a new data explorer. Data Explorer allows you to traverse all of your databases that you have inside of your Metastore that you have registered to Databricks SQL. In this example, we have a database here that Max had created with his previous step, and he'd done all the ETL to get the data into those structures. And now we need to grant Tori access. Like Max said, you could do grant statements in SQL, that's fine. Is there a better way? With Databricks SQL, there is. So if you look at the new Data Explorer, we can select the database and then look at the tables. We can view the schema of the tables and even see sample data. But most importantly, we can set permissions with the UI. So if I need to grant permissions to Tori, I can just go into the screen, look up Tori's ID, grant her the appropriate permissions, and click OK. And now Tori has the ability to access the data that Max just provisioned for her, and I, as the administrator, have a very convenient UI to process the requests for the different permissions of data. With that, I think we're going to take it back over to Tori, where she has the data that she needs to be successful. We've given her the access to the data that she needs to be successful. So, Tori, over to you.
Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm super excited as the lead analyst because my desk is actually within the business and I actually sit right outside of the CRO. So I got this Slack message from Max in a week instead of months that I'm used to at previous companies saying that the data is made available. And I'm saying like, is this real? Well, one of the issues that I have with Databricks SQL, because I just got access to it, is that I'm used to Oracle from a previous company and Microsoft. And I was like, well, Spark SQL, how different is that? And Max sent me this great query and as a starter query in Slack and goes, hey, just pop this into the query service. I've done a little tutorial of understanding how to navigate a little bit in Databricks SQL. And he goes, just copy and run it, and even gave me some markdown. So just to give you guys, for anybody on the phone that's not familiar with Databricks SQL, when you think about what Max just showed you, from a maturity standpoint with Databricks, we've realized, as I was explaining to you with IDES, that there's different ways of which personas interact with the data. And before, when we had a notebook, we couldn't fit I'm going to get this wrong. This is my squirrel list too, but a square peg in a round hole for everybody to be able to interact with a notebook. So we've made our IDES or experience for those personas much more specific to what they're trying to do without limiting the aspect of collaboration and being able to switch between languages or be able to collaborate on the platform in itself. So in order to get to the SQL space, you're going to have this little drop down here from apparent navigation. I'm clicking on Databricks SQL, and this is where my home is in Databricks. For the first service I'm going to pop into, I'm going to assume I already have one of these clusters, is the query. So he already copy and pasted this query for me in Slack, and I'm not going to show you guys my whole Slack. I've already actually saved it, so just bear with me on the, and then I'm going to pop into here to my queries. You'll see here, event analysis. And so he already copy and paste this. And he was so nice because he already knew that I have experience with Oracle and Microsoft, that he's already showed me the dot notation and the simple colon notation that we have in 8.3 to be able to unnest the attributes within our bronze or gold table. And so when you think about that with product analytics or an action with an event, you'll have an event that happens within an application, and then you have all of the attributes that are associated with that action. Most of the time with attributes in an application, that's managed by application development. And it gets really sticky when you have mobile application and web application, because then you have iOS, Android, and web. And they're generally not succinct across the three, unless you pay for something that's like quite expensive and it's Google Analytics 360. So from that standpoint,
can I ask you a question real quick from something that came in the chat? I think that you might be good at answering. What is there a reason why you want the nested data structures and you don't want the data engineer to parse them all out for you and create you a tabular structure? Is there a reason why you want to be empowered with the tools to unnest and parse it yourself?
Yes. Okay. So that's a great point. Thank you for asking that question, because that should bring me back to why I'm excited that there is a nested column. So not just from a notation perspective, if you think about all of the actions that happen within an application, this is going to grow large and it's going to change. If they even change the name of the button, that changes to a new attribute within that action. So Max being able to leverage schema evolution in the exploratory phase of that refinement pipeline. so from bronze to silver, allows him to not have to manage the collaboration and the unification of that data for feature development with application dev, which is really difficult and somewhat impossible, especially across those three odds, in order to do that for the analyst. Now, when you think about on the end consuming for the analyst, the engineer doesn't want to unnest all of those attributes and make them columns, because I likely only need 3 of them and I have to explore. And this is generally how they do it with analysts. They have to go into the application, give themselves access to that application in your organization, and filter down to their specific user ID and start clicking on things. Because as you can see here, most of the time it's not intuitive to what's actually displayed on the application of what's selected or done that it is on the back end. So from an exploration phase, much simpler for me to be able to search and scroll through the attributes within a column versus having to go through all of the columns and find the right value. And that's just for speed of productivity to find what I need. But from a performance perspective, since I don't need that, having to have all of those columns unnested is unnecessary even to put into Power BI or to have as a table that you would consume to any downstream application. Is there anything you'd want to add to that, Franco or Max?
I just want to say that I'm looking at your screen here, and I can't believe that query returned in 256 milliseconds. This is like a similar experience that you would get out of a data warehouse, but we're not in a data warehouse. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes. So,
Wow.
and yes, I will even show that if you thought about doing that in Power BI, even from a point and click tool perspective, which Power BI does have the ability to unnest JSON, it's really slow. It's like doing that in Excel on your desktop. And even with Power BI, it requires you, or even if you select it, that it still unnests all of the attributes. So you can see here, this will grow. Might be even 50 attributes associated with an action within an application. If you did that within Power BI across the history of all of the events, even within a year, you're going to see 6 hours of the spinning wheel of death on your desktop. So not only from a speed perspective, even from a discovery, you have the availability of doing that within your SQLite in the cloud directly. Thanks for mentioning that.
Power Databricks SQL brings to the table. And this is why Tori is super excited to have Databricks SQL like on her hands, because now she can do a lot of things that she always wants to do without me being in the way. And all I do is say, hey, here is your data, go figure it out, or go play around with it and figure out what to do. And so I know Tori is about to show us her magic. And so I can't wait.
Yeah, and so even the collaboration between me and Max, him knowing that I don't specifically know the syntax differences between Oracle and let's say Spark SQL, he's already given me a little bit of a guide, which is most of the time what analysts look at. I mean, even if you think about it right now, you look at Reddit and you Google search, you go, how do you do this? And then they go, and you don't go directly to the documentation that shows you exactly what that notation is. He sped me up by giving me the actual doc that I can go to within Databricks with the new JSON operators, and has already showed me a huge time saver by, don't get too worried. I know I've explained this to you, but let me give you this query to show you I've already unnested some of the attributes within request params, as well as selected a parent, and then showed you how simply you could change that to whatever data type you need. Because again, this is in the exploratory phase. Anytime that you're in the exploratory phase or POC with an engineer and an analyst, that QA, or when you hear that quality assessment, is always that time period where it's like a year. And it's really just dev and clarifying and discovery on the analyst side versus and vice versa. So this speeds up that QA and the exploratory phase by putting that onus and availability for analysts to also do their POC work. And so he's showed that to me and said, hey, I know you don't know what you need yet. And I'm also totally aware of how difficult it is to try to find, validate, and keep track of your application events, especially when you're doing data analysis. Let me show you simply how I've already unnested this, and then also how you can explore. And if this wasn't the right thing, I'm sorry, I didn't know, because I'm an engineer and don't know exactly what you're trying to do or exactly what you're iterating in your mind for your business. So I want you to be able to do that. And so he's been able to show that for me. And I can go in here and be like, okay, I'm going to go down to my user ID, and then I can easily be able to search across those values and then find out, oh, that's what it's called, the ARN AWS IAM. That is not what it's called on the screen in the app when the customer uses it. So this just gives you an overview of that query. But just to show you, if you thought about doing this in the data science workspace, or even when you think about on the phone right now, as you do this with Tableau or Power BI, when you go into Power BI, you have to click on different data sources. It shows up that ODBC connection. And then sometimes even when you're searching across that, you're still getting the spinning wheel of death depending on your computer and what you're allowed or allotted by your business. You have a really easy interface based off what you've been granted data to search right across where you're actually executing the SQL query. So you're able to go across the databases that I've been granted access depending on the source, and then I can easily click. So instead of having to not only find and copy, it's super difficult to have the time consuming, write that out in SQL of all the different column names that have been given. Even for Max to cast it to be something that's easier for me to write select statements on. You have a really easy tool next to you in Databricks SQL where you can just click and it will populate that into your screen to the right. That saves you a bunch of time, especially when it comes to things you can't control, but it also does the tables and databases for you as well. And then a shift enter will do a quick execute. You can actually even just do specific amounts. Let's say, oh, I'm not sure if this is right. Well, here, I'm just gonna make this work again. I'm gonna make sure that this is right. Oh, I must have done something. There we go. So sorry, this happens when I do the execute. So I'm gonna make sure that this is right. Let's say that you're not exactly sure. You can actually just select one of these things and just run the code. And this is a great point for me to add. So you can run the selected that when you have these demo failures, or even when you go through a code and you're in SSMS and you realize that you were wrong or you were more right 3 times ago, this is where I'm going to go in and show you the most amazing feature that is now Data Science Workspace to Databricks SQL, where you can go back to when was executed accurately and run it from there. And so before, when you thought about doing that in SSMS, something like that, you had to actually do this on your own from Priya. So this actually has saved me in many demos. So this is just an overview of the democratization of what you have for JSON and being able to explore your data. But let's think about this from a lead analyst perspective. When you think about proliferating this to the 50 analysts you have in different desks across different departments and what they're comfortable with or what they know about Databricks SQL. So thinking about how Max empowered me as a lead analyst and understanding, one, the stepping stone of the syntax isn't too difficult. And ultimately, it's a really small barrier to a really great need and availability of what I can do for my organization. Let's think about doing that for other analysts that may not know SQL as well, or even syntax differences between Microsoft and Spark. When you think about from Excel, Power BI to SQL, SQL is the easiest to learn for business analysts or even the business in general when it comes to actually querying languages versus Python and Scala. A really cool feature that I sometimes glitch over, but I have a way of thinking about it in a different way when you think about proliferating that to other analysts. We have this idea of query snippets. Now, this is a new feature that's different than other BI tools like Power BI or something similar that you're used to thinking about. And query snippets is like similar to a UDF where you're giving a defined function or you're making a snippet of code available for others to just query in, and I'm about to go show this, of that select statement. And let's think about this even from a case win statement, because you're going to have case win statements in product analytics, because you're going to have to rename not only attributes from what the column or what they're actually defining, but the actual actions within that column. I used to have to do that just to give you guys a perspective in transportation when you think about unnesting all of the fuel. Well, you're going to think about this, and I don't want to get too deep into it, but whatever is actually labeled in the application, you need to grant that up so that the CEO or CRO sees that in a way that makes sense to what they're trying to do. So case win statements, even for marketing and other use cases, are something similar, hard to actually standardize with your engineer, and ultimately going to have to be managed and evolved with your analyst. You're able to just create that snippet of code, give it a name that makes sense to what you're trying to do. I'm just going to say Tori for this part, but I'll just say JSON template SQL, and then you can even give it a description that makes that a lot more applicable. Go back to your query and say, okay, analysts in 50 different business units across the organization, if you want to understand JSON, I've already given that markdown so that they could go directly to the doc. I'm going to have a virtual Zoom meeting that gets them really excited about Databricks SQL, just from my perspective and understanding where they're having trouble. but get them excited about exploring the data in a much faster, more efficient way because they are experiencing pain in their current desktops. And then they're able to go in, just select, and then you'll see here. You see where it says snippet in gray, and it'll populate the code for them based off that snippet. And so most of the time you think, okay, well, is that exactly what they're going to use? No, this is just for them to go in really simply and see that, use it as an example, change it as they need, and then rename that query to what they're trying to explore or do. Now you can fork a query, but that's where it gets really messy. So again, you're just sharing code, you're trying to proliferate the example or the excitement of what you can do with Spark SQL.
This is great. So it's essentially a really flexible way to, the way that I think you're articulating here is very similar how I articulate it. It's like Management Studio for the analyst in the cloud with a lot of extra bells and whistles, because you can write your SQL code, get your response, but then you can also add visualization. And then the data engineer, when you find the value, when you actually build the SQL that gets you what you need, you can then take that, send it back to the data engineer, and then they can put it into production, or they can kind of take it and then put it where it needs to go. But this, there's some questions coming up. We are super powering Power BI. So we're not just showing you just Databricks SQL here. So everyone hold on, please wait. We are getting there. We're showing you how to superpower your Power BI experience, right? So.
Yep, and I'm about to show that. I don't want to get too much. Just to give you a 2-minute exciting thing as well, when I thought about this, specifically with my customer, but then also thinking about this in my experience, you are correct in the fact that you have full visualization capabilities as well as alerts, conditional-based alerts. Why is that really exciting with Databricks SQL to augment your existing Tableau and Power BI investment? Is that there's no licensing cost associated with Databricks at all. You pay for what you use. So when you think about product analytics, a lot of your product owners or the head of product need to see prototyping or see things that are specific to an internal organization and don't have a lot of business value for your executives to see, but are still super important. Most of the time you have a hard time getting that in your business approved for licenses, and it's a cost that's unnecessary, but still super important. You have the ability to build all of these dashboards and functionality for other use cases of product analytics, data quality, etc., in Databricks SQL without that additional cost, without having to learn a new tool. So to supercharge it, I'm going to go back over to Power BI and then talk about the 2 features today. Is there anything else that you guys want to add about Databricks SQL before I jump into that?
Absolutely not. You hit on all of the features I love. Snippets, the SQL window, and all the new parsing techniques that you can do. Those are excellent features. Thank you.
I'm ready to do data engineering in Databricks SQL now.
Yes, and I always like to tell people from a collaboration perspective, right tool, right time. So a lot of engineers are mostly excited about Databricks SQL because again, it's out of the box. You don't have to write certain things or do certain things in your own way. You don't have to do your own visualization in R or any other language. So when we think about the audit log delivery or the actual application underlying data, amazing thing of my engineer, because Max is also a baddie, is that he gives me this understanding of what is available in the data and what it needs. So if we just get an idea of what we're doing within this specific schema, these are just events that are happening within an application. They're not going to change. So it's not like a microservice for when a customer is looking up a credit record and that credit record is going to change or evolve, right? So when you think about that from an incremental refresh perspective, and I'm going to give it an overview of what incremental refresh is, this is more of an easy use case. But it's specifically easy because Max, already knowing that we got a UTC timestamp, has had a consistent understanding of analysts and data scientists needing a readable and formatted date and time, as well as aggregating it to just a date. So he has already done that for me in my silver layer, knowing that that's just a cleansing technique that you'd need to do across any use case. And therefore, when I'm going to show you this incremental refresh, I'm going to talk about the different use cases and how you would achieve that incremental refresh within Power BI. But the ultimate thing I want to talk about when I go through the actual understanding of this is that most of the time it's difficult right now to get incremental refreshes because one, you don't understand query folding, or query folding is even hard for me to understand because it's dependent between your third-party application Power BI and then the other application or vendor that you're working with, Databricks, and what is supported and what's limited. In addition to that, analysts don't even know the difference between truncate and load and incremental refresh because it's an engineering task. So being able to show you Databricks SQL is, if you're trying to do incremental refresh or thinking about improving Power BI, the collaboration is just something to really hone in at first, because it's much simpler, much faster for your engineer to understand the date that needs to be put in place for incremental refresh. Might actually already even have it on the back end of how they actually refresh the data currently for that table. And therefore it can actually persist that or give you the exact column that you need. But to give an overview of incremental refresh, let's think about this in terms of maybe you do change instead of it just being transactions and they don't. Why do you think about incremental refresh at all in data specifically in Power BI? And the fact of the matter is, for Power BI, this is simple to understand, but refreshes are faster. So you'll really only want the most recent data. It's redundant and unnecessary compute to be able to refresh things that have not changed. Refreshes are more reliable because every time Power BI refreshes the data set, it duplicates. And that's because, of course, you don't want to have an end user experience while they're in the report to say, so sorry, out of order, come back in 10 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour. So it actually duplicates the model as it's actually refreshing. So the faster you can make that, especially as your data grows, the better, especially for the end user experience and for the cost of Power BI Premium. In addition to that, it also enables large data sets up to, I think, I'm actually not sure about the limitation in Power BI, but 100 gigabytes. But even from that standpoint, it enables large data sets in the cloud for Power BI. If you guys are familiar with working with Power BI Desktop currently, you know that actually getting the data into Power BI Desktop is the biggest problem because you're using your computer and your compute resources. You're going to want to be able to only load in, which is what it does with incremental refresh, a small portion, deploy that to the web, and then do that first initial truncate and load up in the cloud with Power BI, because you're going to leverage your premium capacity and Azure. In addition to that, that's like super easy to set up, and I'm going to jump on over to Power BI to show you that. But thinking about this from a architectural perspective, you're not going to want to incrementally refresh all your sources and tables. Why? Because if you think about your architecture or the fact that in this use case, all of the events that happen with an application, you're going to have another table of distinct users. Your users and their attributes are not going to change all the time. And even furthermore, let's say you really only have 100,000 customers right now. Loading 100,000 records isn't going to take too long, and isn't that troublesome when you think about it. The transactions, you're going to have users doing 10,000 transactions a day, thinking about that across 100,000. That's where your table is going to get into the 100 gigabytes. It's not going to be your dimension tables or your slow changing dimension. So really thinking about, you only need to think about the date and the actual format of the fact tables when it comes to actually incrementally refreshing. Well, if we go into this, why not direct query or dual mode in Power BI? Direct query being you direct connect to Databricks and leverage Spark real time. And then dual mode being that you both have imports, you actually cache that data in and bring it into Power BI, as well as direct query. You really only want to do direct query specifically for the use case that you need to see immediate results in near real time. It's costly because you have to keep your compute up 24/7. So you're going to be paying not only for Power BI licensing and that process, but also for Databricks. It's not needed if you don't need that. And it's fault prone when it comes to two-party integrations. So when you think about needing real-time reports and understanding latency, you're going to have to debug between Power BI and Databricks. And so it's a use case that you want to make sure is really fine-tuned, and just know that it seems like a click of an easy button, but you really want to think about that from a perspective of why you're doing or what you're doing before you just kind of move over to the easy. And so that's why I always think about this, because I always have, or I've always had experience with analysts that just did direct query, because I don't even have to worry about refreshing in Power BI. It's just always the right data. And then you get to explain the downsides or even what that means in terms of how. Okay, so anyways, I'm going to jump on over to Power BI. So you can see here that I'm already showing you incremental refresh. I've done this prior, where I've just created simulated fake data where it's grouped it by the events, and I've added to a new day. So you can see here that I've added 2019 from the original records, and then I'm going to add today into Power BI.
As you're switching over to Power BI and going on, I just want to articulate and highlight the main point here is that in order to do incremental refresh, you have to have something to increment, and date is very common. the increment. Is it limited to date in Power BI? Can you only do date, or is there like other min-max things that you can do? But basically, your data has to have date. Work with your data engineer to figure out what is that concept, and then you can do the incremental refresh. Is that correct? Or
Yep, that's exactly it. And I'm going to show you here, if you guys can all see my Power BI desktop, I've already connected to Databricks. Super easy to do. New source, type in Azure Databricks. Do not get worried about having Azure in the front. It can connect to Databricks in any of all three clouds. But I've already connected, configured to that specific table. And you can see here that I've already created the 2 new parameters, which is followed from the documentation in Power BI. And I can follow up with a link, or Max, if you want to shoot that into the chat, of how to operate this in Power BI. So creating this new parameter with the range start and range end dates, which I'd already communicated with Max and understood from the data source to what I'm applying for those events to utilize. And that's where you can see here, I've already created that with exactly from the documentation what it needs to be named. I've selected this as date time as they've instructed, and then given that current value, which really only needs to start from something way back that you understand is going to be the very beginning of your data set. And what you'll configure after within the service, as well as when I load this data in, is when you'll apply the logic of how much data you would like to keep and truncate and load. Let's say, for instance, every time you refresh this, you really want to refresh the last 2 days worth of data or 1 day, depending on your source. For this one specifically, we only really refresh this every 15 minutes now, but before, or even thinking about this in terms of how I need to deliver it to the end user, I only really look at this from a daily perspective. It's aggregated up enough, then I'll only keep in that day's worth of data. But first and foremost, you need to create these 2 parameters, and that's range in and range start. Range start being when you want to actually start the refresh or the truncate load, and then the range in being the end period. Any questions so far, Franco, or am I explaining?
no, this is great. I think we're on the right track. John, are there any relevant questions coming in that you think would help clarify this? I can't see the Q&A in Zoom, but I have on the other channels, I'm not really seeing much complicated. People generally understand what's going on. Are you seeing anything?
Not that aren't answerable by text, quite frankly. So I think
No worries.
okay.
So you can see here where this is where you'll configure those parameters. Now, you're going to get this often with Power BI, and that's why testing is so important. But I've already tested this with Databricks and Power BI, but that's why I really wanted to hone in on the next feature, native query support, but that query folding aspect. So this pop-up button, them saying unable to confirm if the query can be folded, is not saying that it can't. It's that from how they're on the back end, understanding the folding between Power BI and Databricks, they just can't, from that feature perspective, confirm. And so this sometimes gets really troublesome for analysts, like, is this supported? It says that it's not. That doesn't necessarily mean that, but that's where you get that issue with understanding, does this work or does it not between 2 different tools? I'm going to show you native query support after this, but I just wanted to give that perspective because that's exactly what I was honing in on earlier. So you can see here, all I did was double click on the table in order to pop this up after I created my parameters in the query editor. And you're going to turn on incremental refresh. You're going to select how many years you'd actually like to hold before it actually drops off. So for instance, if you only needed to see the last 5 years of transactions and you don't even need to start housing it in all of its eternity, then you can just keep that threshold before it actually drops off. That's super important because, again, when it comes to actually proliferating how much data you're going to store and then the performance aspect, it's always nice to be and do exactly only what you need. Sometimes with analysts, it's like all is better than nothing. Even from a Power BI model perspective, you do not want to have a cube when you think about every single question and every report that an operations department for this specific use case can answer, because it gets really troublesome from dependencies, from performance, even trying to understand where the performance is painstaking between different reports in your business. So that is where you can select how much data you'd like within it. And then for the actual refresh, when it actually checks what it'd like to truncate and load, this is when you can select, maybe you want to make sure it's a week. Let's just keep the last week's worth of records that have changed, just knowing that maybe you potentially know that they have changed. this is where you can configure it. Now, this is dependent again on your use case and your data, but also being able to select data type changes. So if you know that really nothing else would change within a certain time period of 30 days, let's think about even processing with transactions. Pending transactions are only in a certain time frame. You already know that. You can just select here that certain time frame, bank 7 days, 10 days, and then just do truncate and load, or not truncate and load, but an incremental refresh of 10 days. So you're not limited to daily. So you have that ability to select that. And then only refreshing complete days. But once you're done with that, this is when you select your specific needs for incremental refresh, and then you deploy it to Power BI service. So I'm gonna pop on over here to Power BI service. And then you can see here, once I've deployed that, be able to go into settings. And you do not need a gateway connection. You have direct connection between Databricks and Power BI. So all you have to do is configure your credentials, either through token or you have OAuth using your Azure Active Directory, etc., within your organization. I might need just to update my token, which is fine. I can show you that to you later. But once you deploy that, all you do is refresh, and it'll only refresh within 2 minutes versus what originally took 30 minutes or an hour. And thinking about this in terms of development later on, which is always important to note, when you deploy a incremental refresh model to the Power BI service, as this starts to grow, you can't export back out to desktop like you can in normal models to your computer. And that's for the same reason that for the large data set format, you actually deployed it to the cloud. You're not going to want to import that back down to your computer, and you can't even do that within Power BI. So it's super important to just note as you're in your POC phase or proof of value, for just trying to get an understanding of this is what you need, which is most of the time exactly what an analyst goes through for at least about 6 months with your end consumer. It's better to kind of just filter down that data or fine tune it with Databricks SQL and Max before you productionize it and put it into Power BI service, because you're not gonna be able to export that back down and edit it. And as you guys know, the Power BI desktop is the authoring tool for Power BI. So if you can't change any of the formats of data that you can look at within your data model, or even be able to change some of the connecting points, you won't be able to do that when you do an incremental refresh. So it's super important to note that you'd want to productionize that before you deploy it. Okay, we have about 2 minutes left, I think. Do we have about 2 minutes left, Franco? Because I'm gonna really hit it home with the last one.
Yeah, hit it home.
Okay, so this is going to be released in September. We have a lot of new features that are going to be released for Power BI and Databricks. Two that I'm really, really excited about is native query support and Cloudfetch. Cloudfetch being for performance, especially as we start getting into direct query use cases, and you guys have those business valuable use cases for real-time data and reports between Power BI. In addition, for embedding, we're now going to have native query support between the ODBC connector or the Azure Databricks connector and Databricks. So like you would see in a SQL Server database connector within Power BI, you can click down these advanced options, and now you're going to have that SQL statement availability. Now, when you guys just saw Databricks SQL, when you think about copying and pasting and trying to proliferate Spark SQL and Databricks SQL within your organization, really thinking about center of excellence, you have the ability now to just copy and paste in it in Slack, collaborate on your Slack channel, and they can throw that into Power BI and load it automatically without having to go into Databricks SQL and copy and paste that themselves, etc. Now, why is this important also? In addition, you don't have to do the point and click, but query folding. So when you worry about all of the different buttons that you can click and all the available features within the query editor, don't have to worry about query folding when it comes to what's supported, because you're directly doing it natively from Spark without having to worry about Power BI and what Power BI is supporting between Spark.
That's great, Tori. I want to articulate a little bit more of that, and then Karen, you can take us out. Cloudfetch is an amazing new technology that leverages object store as the intermediary rather than transporting large amounts of data over the JDBC or ODBC connector, which is known to not have good data throughput. Databricks the Databricks SQL endpoints have a new technology that we'll be rolling out over the next month or two called Cloudfetch, which actually uses the fast object. Well, it uses object store, which we can parallelize the data throughput to, which we can get much better throughput to the application. Both sides have to support it. The capabilities in Databricks SQL today. You can download our ODBC driver. If you're on Microsoft technologies and if you might be using Excel, you can load the download the ODBC driver from our website and then plug it into your DSNs in Windows. If you want directions on how to do this, reach out. And you can connect Power Query in Excel or anything that supports Power Query into using Cloudfetch on Databricks SQL. And essentially for data, if you ever had problems like with your data coming back to you in your Power BI application, either refreshes taking too long or data transport getting in your way, Cloudfetch is really going to help you out. So awesome call, Tori. Thank you very much for that. Karen, you want to take us out?
Yeah, thanks, Franco. So I just dropped the link to the session recording in the Zoom chat and also in LinkedIn. So you're welcome to revisit the session at a later date if you'd like to. So just to close out, I just want to say thank you so much, Max and Tori. That was an awesome presentation. We're so happy to have you. And thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the session. And we have another one coming up next week. I'm going to announce that later today. So we hope you'll join us next week. And thanks to our hosts, Franco and John. And with that, take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.